Hey, welcome to another Fundamental Friday. My name is Tyler. I work with Tyler Edlin, and today we're going to look at some creature design. So let's jump in. Okay, so when working on a concept design project, not necessarily just for creature design, but for any design project really, it's a great idea to start with a mind map. And that is essentially putting your ideas down to narrow down the scope and really zero in on what you're going to be designing and thinking about all the various factors that go into that design. By doing this, you're essentially narrowing the scope of the project by making a lot of design decisions before you even get to the design phase. It'll give you a lot more focus when you're designing so that you're not just fumbling around over various different ideas. This will help you lock in on one idea and then you can ideate on that one idea. So you can see in this example, this has nothing to do with creature design, but this was just one that I grabbed off the internet. Unfortunately, I'm not sure who created this, so I can't give them a shout out, so I do apologize about that. But as you can see, the general idea is they're doing something based off of Pan's Labyrinth, and they're throwing down basically any idea that they've got for it. So, things like atmosphere and weather, they want it to be cold and dark, which maybe leads to lights being neon or something like that. They've got it located in a forest, but in Japan. So they're starting to think of the environment. Also, creatures. They're going to have mystical creatures in this world. Kitsunes, owls, that kind of thing. They're starting to think about vehicles and characters. The overall genre or vibe, fantasy thriller, and things like weapons. So for each one of these offshoots, you want to be making smaller decisions, answering those questions. You're constantly narrowing the scope. So a lot of mind maps will look like this. They sort of branch out in all directions, and as you kind of go down the branches, they get smaller and smaller, more precise decision making happening. Personally, I prefer to just sort of list it out categorically. So you can see some of the general things that we're starting to think about specifically for creature design. So first up, what is it? What's the species or genus, that kind of thing? Is it a mammal, reptile, amphibian, bird, fish, or cephalopod? Those are two completely different things, but I just put them together as like ocean things. Insects and arthropods, parasites, viruses, microbes, or are we doing like a prehistoric creature like a dinosaur? Is it a predator or a prey animal? And this will dictate a lot of your decision making down to the anatomy. Does it have omnidirectional eyes or binocular eyes? A lot of prey animals like deer, cows, and horses and things like that, they have eyes on the sides of their head to give them more of a 360 omnidirectional view because they're basically constantly on the lookout for predators. Whereas predator animals like, cats and dogs and things like that, they have binocular vision like we do, where both eyes are on the front of their head, which gives them an overlapping cone of vision, and that helps them with depth of field. They can better gauge distances because they need to gauge the distance in order to attack their prey. Food is very much related to that. You'll see there's a lot of overlaps between these different things, but are they a carnivore, herbivore, insectivore, omnivore, or are they a cannibal? I don't know if cannibal is the right term, but some birds eat other birds. Some frogs and toads eat other frogs. So that's what I meant by that. That's probably not the right term, but this is just for my own thoughts anyways. So what's their habitat? What's the biome? Is it snow, forest, grasslands, tundra, desert, ocean, or mountains? Again, this dictates a lot about what the creature is. What are their survival needs to survive in that biome? Is there something for warmth? Do they have thick fur? Is there something more specific about the protection of that? Things like otter have fur, but it's more of like an oily fur so that it protects them from the water. Their undercoats don't get wet. I think the sort of greasier outer layers of their fur keep them protected. Do they have camouflage? Camouflage will come up a lot in other categories as well. And then environmental impacts. Does the environment affect them in any way, or conversely, do they have an impact on the environment? Are they an invasive species? Reproduction, what's their life cycle and what's their lifespan? What's their gestation period like? Do they lay eggs? Do they have larva and pupa stages? Next, what are they covered in? Do they have skin, scales, fur, feathers? Is it an exoskeleton? Then defense, do they have like a physical defense, like thorns, quills? Do they have a poison, that kind of thing? Do they have camouflage? How do they camouflage? What are they, camouflaging to? It would be something in their environment probably. Do they have growth? Do they make themselves look bigger? Things like cattails and a lot of lizards have neck frills that can expand to make them look larger and more imposing than they actually are as a defense mechanism. Do they have bright colors connoting poison? Or are they a mimic? Some species have really bright colors, like poisonous species, to tell their predators that, hey, I'm poisonous, even though they're actually not. They're just mimicking poisonous species. What's their mating like? Do they have bright colors to attract their mates? Are males more colorful? They often are. What are their mating rituals like? Do they build nests for their partners? Dancing, singing? Do they emit pheromones? Do the females eat the males, maybe, like some species of mantises? Or do they have competitions? Do the males fight each other? If so, what do they need for that? Do they ram their horns like rams? And then we've got things like animation and locomotion. How do they move? Are they large and muscular but kind of slow? Or are they small, quick, and agile? Do they maybe have a proto-flight type thing? Are they sort of in the middle of an evolutionary chain where, there's some sketches of things like velociraptors with a little bit of wings where, they probably couldn't fly, but maybe as they're running really quickly, they can take these bounding leaps that they sort of get a little bit of airtime. Do they have reverse articulated legs, or do they have appendages that can move in an interesting way, almost like the really crazy fins on an angelfish or something? And what's the scale of this thing? And then lastly, is there any kind of human interaction? Are they a beast of burden, a pet? Are they harvested at all, sheep's wool? So all of these and more are questions that you should be asking yourself about this creature. I think it's pretty fun to just imagine that it's a Planet Earth special and David Attenborough's telling you about this creature that you're designing. What's David going to tell you about this creature? Where do they live? What do they eat? How do they reproduce? From there, we gather reference. So the designs I'm going to be exploring today is some sort of lizard that lives in a volcanic area. I'm going to try to keep it pretty grounded in reality, but it's obviously going to have an elemental effect to it. So, there's a little bit of whimsy to it. So I pulled up a few different lizard references here. So there is actually a creature called a lava lizard. So we've got that. And then looking at things like Komodo dragons and monitors, and then iguanas. So the general idea that I had is that it would be mostly scaled, and the scales would mimic its environment by sort of being this dark, rocky, kind of dried lava type texture. But then the skin in between the scales would be more like that hot lava, where maybe it's got some bioluminescence happening and it's emitting some light. And the thing that sparked this idea was maybe there is a firefly in this environment that, as part of their camouflage, they look like a spark or an ember coming off a fire. So normally fireflies have more of a yellow hue to them, but in this environment, this firefly would be more red-orange. And so it would look like a spark or an ember flying up off of the lava. At this stage of lava running, I don't know how much it's spitting little embers and sparks up into the air, but we're just going to go with it for the demo. So the fireflies look like sparks as sort of a type of mimicry or camouflage, but then the lizards eat them. So I guess, half the time maybe they're eating actual sparks. Just don't question it too much. It'll be fine. So one thing I'm going to play with in the various designs is both the scale and the overall shapes of this creature. So that's one thing I haven't locked in, but I want to explore, because obviously Komodo dragons are these big lumbering creatures. They're slower, which could fit really well. They could be this big, rocky golem type thing that eats these fireflies. It could be maybe something in between, like an iguana. The iguana's face and scales would look really cool with a rocky texture to it. But maybe they're small and agile and they flit about really quickly. That also makes sense for the environment because it's really hot. Maybe they shouldn't be staying in one area too quickly. Maybe they're constantly on the move, zipping in and out. And the scale will also change their eating habits a little bit too, and some of the secondary ideas that I had. So one idea that I had that I wanted to explore is maybe they have an expanding mouth pouch, sort of like frogs do. And this would glow with bioluminescence to look like the fireflies. And then the fireflies might go to mate or something like that. And then of course they get eaten. But of course the scale of that might not work. The scale of the firefly would have to match the scale of the mouth patch, which to me tells me that the lizard would be a smaller scale. So that might work better with something like the lava lizard scale. Whereas if it's something bigger, like an iguana or a monitor, maybe we do something a little bit different. Maybe the horns and frills on its back are longer, skinnier frills, almost like antennae that glow at the tips. something like this here. So this deep sea creature, maybe the iguana has something like that. And then the tips of these sticks light up, which draws the firefly to it. And then of course, it doesn't even have to be around their head. Lizards have really quick tongues, so they would just snatch it out of the air as soon as it gets close. And if that is the case, I can still use the idea of a mouth patch maybe as a larger section that glows orange. That would be quite impressive. Maybe the males do this in order to attract the females or something like that. So start leaning a little bit into the idea of some amphibians. Also looking at snakes to see how that expands. The hard scales have softer skin in between to expand to that. So if our lizards have something like the frogs going on, it might look something like what snakes do. And then one last note here. I don't know if I'm going to get to rendering today, but if I do, the danger with these dark, rocky creatures is it can be hard to read the overall forms if they get too dark. I think this is what we all imagine pretty quickly. You're going to want a dark background to have the bright fire, really stand out and have nice contrast. But we start to lose the overall form, and I don't want that to happen. So when finding reference of lava, I also want to make sure that there's some hue shifts happening. You can see in the bits that are cooling down, we start to get more of a cooler hue to it. We start to get into like purples and blues in contrast to the deep warms of the hot lava. That will allow me to lighten up the values of the skin a little bit, but still give me that really nice bold contrast between the hot fire between the scales and the darker scales themselves. You can see here's a good example of this where it's clearly dark, but we do get some lighter values in the highlight sides. We can clearly read the forms that are happening here. So now we're getting into the sketching finally. Sorry, that first bit was maybe a little bit long, but I think that conveys more information in some ways than the actual sketching. So just sketching out ideas. I'm keeping these quite loose. These are more sort of like gesture sketches almost for now. So playing around with different proportions, you can see sort of more of the iguana type guy on the left. And then now I'm doing a couple of little salamander-esque bodies. So I'm thinking these ones would be pretty small and they would run around on the lava rocks, not staying in one place too long. And that's sort of partly how they survive is not really staying in one spot too long. Now we're getting into a bit of a bigger version, a bit more going back to the iguana maybe. A little bit of getting a bit of the Komodo in the face there. Just playing around with different sizes, scales, but also trying to play with different poses and looking at these things from different points of view. This version becomes a bit more of a big beast. Again, trying to play with different scales. So, we did a few small and medium sized ones. So now, I'm thinking that this one might be quite big, sort of the size of a Komodo dragon or maybe a monitor or something like that. This one here came sort of unexpectedly from some of the reference that I gathered. So in grabbing some of the frog images for the throat pouches, I came across a little tadpole image that had these like little itty bitty legs, and the proportions were sort of awkward and I kind of loved it. So I started throwing that in there. And I think more than anything, this helped me push some of the ideas a little bit. A lot of my sketches thus far were pretty safe. They were pretty, real world basic and that kind of thing. And this one starts to get a little bit ridiculous, but I really like the proportions of that tadpole. And in the reference, it didn't have any front legs yet. And it had these really like little tiny back legs. But of course, that didn't quite work for me. So I was trying to give this design all four legs. And of course, that changes the proportions from what I liked in the reference. So just trying to resolve that. But I quite like this one. This one, I think, starts pushing the envelope a little bit into something a little different, maybe a little bit weird. And then we get another slender guy. This one's a bit more of like a salamander kind of thing, almost like a Mushu from Mulan. And then, of course, doing the tadpole version, sparked the idea of, maybe I can get away from the lizards a little bit and explore the options of doing amphibians or frogs or something like that. So you'll see in a moment, when it comes to having a page of these sketches, both of these sort of felt similar, and I couldn't fit them both onto the page, so I had to pick one. And in the end, I ended up taking the frog one, just because it fit better with the rest of them. That's maybe not the best way to make that decision, but that's what I went for the demo purposes. Poor little tadpole. So now just doing sort of a second pass on these sketches just to bring up the detail a little bit. Essentially, I'm just up-resing the sketches, adding a little bit more detail. Depending on your needs, you don't necessarily have to do this step if you plan on like rendering or something like that. Because at this point I didn't know if I'd have time to do rendering, I was just doing the sketch page. It's also nice to have as a secondary page if you're working on a portfolio or something, have a page of design sketches, and then you can render one of them up as sort of your final finished design. But the secondary page really helps show people your thought process. So I think it's always good to have anyways. So yeah, we won't look at all of this because it gets pretty repetitive and long, but just essentially up-resing these sketches, adding a little bit more detail, starting to indicate some of the scales, that kind of thing. This one here is looking almost snake-like now with the face. So again, definitely dipping into different species of animals, even though overall it still has sort of the shape and proportion of an iguana, playing with subtle little changes. When you're doing surface textures like scales and that kind of thing, you don't necessarily want to apply it everywhere because that will sort of flatten your sketch a little bit. So just, slight indications here and there go a long way. Indicating scales in a few little areas really helps to sell the idea, and saves you a little bit of time too. If you were to add scales like over this entire thing, it would flatten out the image a lot. And we get into the frog one. And on the frog version, you can see that in the throat area, I start to add just like a bunch of little, they almost look like feathers or something. And what I was thinking there was, if this thing has a throat that expands, it's got a bunch of loose skin there. So maybe it hangs in a way that it's like a bunch of little sacs. It's almost like a bunch of little skin tags or something. And it almost gives it like a bearded effect. It almost starts to look like, again, like maybe feathers or something, but it is just skin hanging in sort of a weird way, a lumpy way. And I kind of like that idea because it helps sell the idea that, this thing has room to expand. The skin obviously can be expanded. And I end up bringing that idea into some of the other sketches. So now we're going to render them up. I'm only going to render 2 of them, and even that, I'd say if you're doing a portfolio piece or something, you can pick one finished design and render that up. But, just for demonstration purposes, I figured I'd do a couple of them. So the lighting on this is going to be pretty basic. It's just sort of top down, more or less, and just getting the basic forms of the animal to read. This isn't going to be highly rendered or anything like that. The line work is still in there. I just have it on a layer on top set to multiply. So there, the sketchiness is still going to be there, but just to help sell the idea of this thing, because that elemental fire or lava kind of vibe is a fairly important aspect of the design. I felt like I had to provide at least one renderer just to show what that looks like. Otherwise, the sketches sort of just look like pretty basic lizards. So yeah, just starting to again hint at the texture of the skin a little bit, just a few dots here and there. A little bit of light on the neck spines there. And now we start painting in the lava cracks in the skin. So I'm thinking this would be like thinner skin in between the scales that's showing through, and its throat is like emitting this this lava. So it's, you know, it's sort of like a typical dragon, I guess, where it's, you know, fire breathing question mark, but I don't think it would be actually breathing fire. I think it's like a bioluminescent thing. So I'm starting this off with just flat color because I'm mostly concerned with getting the, you know, the shapes of where my like lava cracks are going to go, and then afterwards I can mess with the colors a little bit, get some hue variation in there, and then also, you know, brighten up some areas to make it look hot. So, but for now, I'm just worried about sort of almost like the mask. You can think of it as the mask where I'm just painting in what's my like silhouette of this kind of thing, if that makes sense. Just looking for the shapes and breakup of the lava. And like the sketches, you don't necessarily want to apply it everywhere. So I'm trying to like taper it off a little bit. Honestly, I think it's still a little bit heavy-handed. I could have gone quite a bit lighter on that kind of thing. It doesn't take much to sell that idea. I might have done a little bit too much, actually. So now just adding a little bit of higher values in there to hint that this is, you know, glowing. So playing around with, now we're starting to like add that actual glow and bioluminescence of it. Again, if we want to be fairly light-handed with the original base orange, when we add the glow effects, we go even less than that. You know, some of these areas are going to glow, but not all of it. Again, if you spread it across the whole body too much, it'll flatten it out and kind of make it look boring. This will draw your eye to where I want you to look, which is, you know, iguanas have sort of one big scale around their throat, which from what I could see and research doesn't necessarily do anything. But I think it's a really nice visual effect. So I want to lean into that and sort of make that area the highest glow. Now you can see that in some of my lava reference, the glow of the lava illuminates some of the rock and gives it that like reddish glow. So just adding a little bit of that sort of a visual, a bloom effect, I guess. It's warming up more of like the rocky texture and visually warming it up in terms of like color saturation, where it's getting some reds. So just adding that in. Again, in select areas only. Just adding a little bit to the body for a little bit of visual interest there, but not too much. Now doing just a bit of like a cooler rim light just to give it a little bit of color variation and helping the forms read a little bit more. And adding our little glows to our dorsal spines there. So in the bigger version, I'm thinking that those spines glow to attract fireflies, and then its throat pouch is to attract mates. And then in the smaller salamander version, I'm thinking it's small enough that its throat pouch is probably about the size of a firefly. So that version is using its throat pouch to attract the fireflies and doesn't use it for mating. So now, of course, we need to do the secondary versions where their throat pouches are expanded. Since, you know, that's the most fun part, where we really add some glow. We get to see the subsurface scattering sort of thing. So everything gets sort of color dodgy.
You know, these neck pouches make them look weird. The proportions get sort of silly almost. It looks sort of awkward. But in the reference, the frogs do look like that. When the throats are expanded like that, they look weird. They just look weird. Now adding again, so this one has that sort of frilly beard thing, and so there'd still be hints of those. You know, I'm thinking it wouldn't necessarily all be expanded. So again, some hints of the surrounding little skin tags there. And then on the bigger version, I'm thinking we see a little bit more actual scales that are being separated by the expanded skin. So this is sort of leaning into that the snake reference that we had. So there we go. Once you're done, you can put it together on a presentation page, for maybe it's for your portfolio or something. You know, try to show us everything you can about this creature. My version is admittedly a little bit confused because I did 2 different versions for the demonstration, and they have sort of different design solutions. Like I said, the small one's pouch is for attracting prey, whereas the large one has the spines for prey, and then the throat pouch is for mating. That's confusing to present 2 different ideas on one page. Again, I'm doing this for the demonstration just to show you a couple different options. But if you're doing this for a portfolio or something, have a page of your sketches and explorations, and then have a page of your final idea. And, you know, show us some of that life cycle that you planned out. You know, you could show the firefly that this thing eats, maybe a little side sketch of some of the environment in which it lives. You can maybe show a little like diagram of it catching the fireflies or something. Maybe show some of the life stages. You know, this thing's eggs would look pretty cool. In fact, I think that would be fun to design. Designing one of the eggs of this thing would be pretty cool. Having some of that same bioluminescence, I think, would be really fun. So yeah, I may keep working on this and explore those ideas a little bit further. So yeah, do as much as you can to show us everything about this creature as you can. So I hope that helped, and definitely go design your own creatures. Have some fun.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had some fun, and I hope you try out some creature designs of your own. If you want to learn more of these fundamental design exercises, definitely check out Tyler Edlin's CGMA class, Fundamentals of Design. You can also check out his group mentorship on Patreon. The links to both of those will be in the description below. As always, thanks so much for watching. Thank you to Tyler Edlin for having me back on the channel. Let us know in the comments what you'd like to see in the future, and we'll see you next time. Okay, bye.